I figured out how to handle if your crush is pulling away from you. Now, stop me if this sounds familiar. So you meet someone new. Things are going great. Chemistry's off the charts. They like you like them. And then, bam, all of a sudden, things are different. They avoid you. They seem less interested. They've pulled away. Why? Well, in my mind, pulling away boils down to a lack of commitment. So I really think if you want to understand why someone pulled away from you and ultimately what to do about it, you first need to understand how we base our commitment decisions in relationships. Take a look at this graphic right here. So in my opinion, this graphic holds the key to understanding everything about why your person is pulling away. So what does it all mean? Well, commitment really boils down to 6 distinct pillars. You have satisfaction, alternatives, fear of loss, scarcity, investment, and urgency. But what do all of these things mean? Well, satisfaction, pretty simple. How satisfied are you in the relationship? Alternatives, is there someone out there better for you than the person you're currently with? Fear of loss, does your partner feel like you'll stick around forever no matter what? Are you overly into them? Is your whole life about them? Scarcity. What's your unique selling proposition? What makes you stand out above all others? Investment. How much time, money, energy is your partner investing into you? And finally, urgency. Is there an urgent reason for why they would want to commit to you? Now, I think it's best to look at each of these pillars as a cup. So here's the general rule of thumb. If you fill the cup up to the top, if you have enough of these specific pillars and it feels like it's satisfied, well, then that tends to bode well. But if you haven't filled up the cup enough, if maybe it's right here instead of here, well, then you've got a problem. So let's imagine that you're looking at all of the 6 pillars. And the cup you have with this one person is filled with satisfaction, it's really high, and filled with alternatives, fear of loss, scarcity, investment, but it's specifically a little bit low on urgency. There's not an urgent reason for why the person would want to commit to you. What does that mean? You have kind of this imbalance in a positive way. Does that mean that that one little negative, not filled up urgency cup harms you? Well, no. Generally speaking, if you have most of the cups filled up in each of the different pillars, one bad cup isn't going to outdo the others. But the opposite can also be true. Let's imagine you have low satisfaction, fear of loss, urgency, investment, but you have maybe one good cup that's filled up. Does that mean that one good cup is enough to overturn things? Well, no. That's ultimately a huge reason for why that person's probably not committing to you. And I promise this will relate to them pulling away, but we need to set the stage first. So as a general rule of thumb, if you're finding that someone who is pulling away from you doesn't have their cups filled, you can kind of reverse engineer and understand why they're pulling away. Maybe they don't have an urgent reason to want to commit to you. Maybe they're not really satisfied with this relationship. Maybe they found a better alternative or think they have. And all of these reasons combine to create this confluence of a decision where they pull away, where they're no longer as interested in you as they initially may have seemed. In fact, they do the opposite. They allow fear to take over. I'm going to lose this person forever. We had such a great connection. I need to fix this right away. And so instead of giving the person space who's pulling away from you, what do? They do the exact opposite. They try to fix everything. And we think a lot of this has to do with anxious tendencies. Now, we've done a lot of research on people specifically going through breakups, but I'm going to make a guess here and say that most of the people who are online searching for advice on men pulling away, women pulling away, they tend to be very anxious individuals. I'm saying that because most anxious individuals tend to be really great problem solvers. And so they will go online looking for ways to solve the problem. And yet the solution to the problem goes against their very nature, which is give the person space. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So the first thing you need to understand about attachment styles and anxious attachment styles is each attachment style has a core wound. So oftentimes what we find ends up happening is people who come to us have the same core wound where they're deathly afraid of being abandoned. Yet the person they're often dating or interested in has more avoidant tendencies, and that person is deathly afraid of losing their independence. And so what happens when these two people enter into a relationship is a certain cycle begins to unfold. This cycle, the anxious person grows close. The avoidant person runs away. The anxious person starts a fight. The avoidant person offers a solution. The avoidant person avoids the solution. There's a short-lived reconciliation, and then guess what? We start over again. And around this goes. And this is not a recipe for success when it comes to relationships in general. It's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for a breakup. So now that we kind of understand what's going on when someone's pulling away from you, most likely it's because they're avoidant by nature. Most likely they're trying to regain their independence. You pushing and trying to fix things usually won't solve things. What will solve things? And I've already kind of alluded to it, but there's a little bit more complication to it than just simply allowing them to have space. So I want you to live by the following mantra. When they pull back, I pull back. So you're probably gonna laugh at me for this analogy, but to view the person that's pulling away from you kind of the same way you would a wild animal. So your goal with a wild animal, assuming you wanna catch it and care for it and help it, is to get close to it. Yet, usually what happens is when you try to approach this wild animal, it runs away, which is exactly what's happening in this specific situation. So that leaves you with two options. Option number one is you could force it into submission. You could run quickly, grab it, force it, put a collar on it, whatever. Or option number two, take time, be patient, slowly inch closer until it begins to trust you and then eventually comes to you. But how do you do this approach? How do you not set them off so that they're pulling away and running away again? Now, a few weeks ago, I posted a video called "This is what happens when you don't chase an ex." And in it, if you actually look at the comments section, someone named CS, which is really cool because those were my initials, asked a question. And their question was, can you make a video on how to play hard to get the right way? Well, I might do that in the future, but believe it or not, friend zone flirt is usually the easiest and most effective way of playing hard to get, of building trust. Here's how it works. And the best way I can describe it is it's a lot like fishing. Now, for those of you who fish, you'll know that you put the line in and you wait for the fish to bite the hook. And once you have them hooked, you reel them in. But how you reel them in is the challenge. You see, what tends to happen for a novice is the second they get a fish to bite the line is they'll furiously try to reel them in. But what happens when you're trying to pull the fish in, but the fish is trying to pull away? The line snaps. Instead, the better approach is to reel them in and then let them go a little bit. Reel them in and then let them go a little bit. And you rinse and repeat this process. Eventually the fish tires itself out and boom, you've got a fish and your line hasn't broken. The friend zone flirt method works very similarly, except we're going to kind of employ this push-pull method. You're going to do something that will indicate to your crush, your person, your ex, whoever you're trying to re-attract here, you're going to do something that indicates you're flirting with them. How you flirt with them is a whole nother video. And in fact, if you want a deep dive on that, Coach Anna and I did a really long, hour-and-a-half long interview where we actually talked about this. So I highly recommend you actually learn the basics of flirting through that interview. It's gonna be a lot more comprehensive than a short video like this. But you're gonna do something that flirts with them. They're going to like the flirting, and once they engage and kind of mirror it back to you, that's where you do something that makes them feel like you're friend zoning them. So you kind of flip their worldview on its head. And then once they have that worldview flipped on its head, you flirt with them again. Now, generally speaking, what you're trying to do is slowly work towards where you're flirting a little bit more and friend zoning a little bit less. What's a correct way to friend zone? Probably my favorite story ever of the friend zone flirt method was we had a client once who invited her ex to come over and help her move out of her apartment and into a new one. Now, she was employing this friend zone flirt method, and things seemed to be kind of going well emotionally between the two, and the guy kind of thought that he might get a little lucky during the move. But when he arrived to her apartment, he found that there was a couple of other guys there helping her. And it kind of made him feel not as special as he initially thought he was. And this is important because it makes him feel like, oh, I'm just a friend to you. And then after that emotional low, she hits him with the emotional high and begins flirting with him again. So this is what you're trying to do when you're dealing with someone who's pulling away from you. Flirt, friend zone flirt. But you also have to balance that fact with sometimes you don't have a good internal clock for figuring out when you are flirting too much. And that's where the when they pull away, you pull away concept comes into play. Try it out.